It's time for the last word with Lawrence O'Donnell. Hey, Lawrence.
Hey, Jen. It is a big winner night here at the last word. And it's not one of Donald Trump's trade negotiators because they have won absolutely nothing yet. In fact,
no deals.
They've lost every day. It's that now, I guess, 200-day long contest about resolving that election for Supreme Court in North Carolina. That is finally resolved by the federal court there. Justice Allison Riggs was reelected, the Democrat reelected over the Republican who has been fighting this and desperately trying to throw out legitimately cast votes. Allison Riggs is going to join us tonight in the winner's circle. That one is finally decided. Big win for the Democrats.
Big one, and she's a great guest. I mean, she's such a good story about someone who's had to battle through absurdity to get to this point. I can't wait to see what she has to say.
Yeah, and she's had to just allow the process to play out in federal court. Now she's the official winner, and she's free to discuss it. She's going to do that tonight.
That's great. I mean, it's also a reminder of how important jobs like that are. You wouldn't have heard of Allison Riggs necessarily had this not happened, and now she's become sort of a model of what the other side's capable of, in terms of trying to prevent an elected person from taking office.
Yeah, and what was at stake in this fight over these election results and over the legitimacy of these votes is a kind of fight we are surely going to see again mounted by Republicans in other places.
No doubt about it. This is a warning sign in many ways, and I'm sure she's got lots of lessons to share on what to do and what to expect.
Well, that's where I'm going to start with her. Thanks, Jen.
Perfect. Thanks, Lawrence. Have a great show.
Thanks. Well, we consider tonight the decline of Donald Trump, the decline of what appears to be his mental acuity, the dramatic decline in his popularity and support among voters, the massive disapproval he now faces. And perhaps most importantly, the decline of Donald Trump's power in Congress, especially in the United States Senate, where Donald Trump is now so weak that he is accepting a Republican senator deciding to defeat his nominee for U.S. attorney in Washington, D.C. Donald Trump's just accepting that. That is a very dramatic decline in power for Donald Trump in the Senate. That really matters. We will get to that later in our discussions tonight. This is the 26th day in a row in which Donald Trump has come out a total loser in the trade war that he launched, which he promised to end by negotiating 90 international trade deals in 90 days. Donald Trump made that promise 26 days ago and has negotiated exactly 0 trade deals. 0. The Trump score has been 0 every day of his trade war. Presidential failure could not be more vivid than that. And that's Donald Trump's own scorebook for failure. 90 deals in 90 days, that's what he said. He's got 0. Donald Trump now looks and sounds more exhausted of his own trade war and losing his own trade war every day, just exhausted by it. Losing his trade war seems to be aging him more rapidly than he might otherwise be aging now at 78. And Donald Trump is saying things now that he has never said before. Donald Trump appears to be losing more than his trade war. There are public moments now where he seems to be losing his mind, like when he sits beside the Prime Minister of Canada in the Oval Office and he describes his desire to seize control of Canada. We are now in the 7th day of Mental Health Awareness Month, and no one has ever made this country more aware of mental health every day than Donald Trump. Donald Trump is trying to cut over $800 billion from the largest mental health provider in the country, Medicaid. And then, of course, there's Donald Trump's own mental health, which has been called into question since his first presidential campaign, which led a group of 27 psychiatrists to co-author a book published in the first year of the Trump presidency titled The Dangerous Case of Donald Trump. 27 psychiatrists and mental health experts assess a president. Some of the co-authors of that book appeared on this program at that time and told us about what they observed in Donald Trump's public behavior that indicated he was possibly suffering from grave conditions, including malignant narcissist and sociopath. They warned us at the time, in that first year of the first Trump presidency, that everything they were seeing and that we were seeing that was problematic in Donald Trump's mental health was only going to get worse. They warned us. They agreed that Donald Trump's mental health could only move in one direction over time in his 70s. They have published new editions of the book in which more and more mental health professionals have joined in the analysis, with the most recent title being The Dangerous Case of Donald Trump. 37 psychiatrists and mental health experts assess a president. It could have been mental illness on display when Donald Trump said the "I don't know" heard around the world. That, of course, was on Meet the Press when Donald Trump was asked by Kristen Welker, "Don't you need to uphold the Constitution of the United States as president?" To which he said, "I don't know." Every high school student in America is supposed to know the correct answer to that question, which is, of course, one word: yes. It is too easy a question to ever have appeared on the SATs. But Donald Trump's answer was, "I don't know," which could be a sign of mental illness, or it could be a sign of early stage dementia in a 78-year-old man, or it could simply be the product of a condition that Donald Trump has been exhibiting throughout his public life since long before he got into politics. And that is, of course, Donald Trump's trademark, public stupidity. In Donald Trump's case, stupidity is the most innocent explanation for his "I don't know." But during Mental Health Month, we have a right to consider other possibilities. One of the possibilities that psychiatrists who considered the case of Donald Trump in their book consider a mental health condition is Donald Trump's public pathological lying. And that could be what's at work in one of the "I don't knows" Donald Trump said today. Remember, when Donald Trump would say anything to avoid saying "I don't know," even though "I don't know" was almost always the correct answer, when he was asked about any public policy issue, he is, after all, the most ignorant person who has ever won the most votes in the Electoral College, and he is the most governmentally illiterate person who has ever been relevant in any way to the American governing process. And because Donald Trump always knew how ignorant he has always been about every aspect of government, he has always been desperate not to reveal his ignorance. And so he has always thrown a flurry of words when asked questions to which the true answer really would be, "I don't know." He always did anything but say, "I don't know." Not anymore. Donald Trump said, "I don't know," a couple of times today.
Is the administration sending migrants to Libya?
I don't know. You'll have to ask Homeland Security, please.
Now, that one could just be Donald Trump's reflexive pathological lying, which the psychiatrists who co-authored that book say is a part of mental illness. It is also entirely possible that it is an honest answer, that Donald Trump actually has no idea where he is sending people to prisons around the world. Massachusetts federal judge Brian Murphy, who was appointed by President Biden, issued an order today to prevent Donald Trump from trying to deport anyone to a prison in Libya. Judge Murphy had already issued an order stopping the new version of Trump deportations to random countries around the world. Lawyers for some immigrants who were told they were going to be sent to a prison in Libya alerted Judge Murphy as news reports were leaking information about the plan, and Judge Murphy issued his order to prevent any deportation flights to Libya. The New York Times reports the filing came after U.S. officials said on Tuesday that the Trump administration was planning to transfer migrants to Libya on a U.S. military plane. They said the flight could have left as soon as Wednesday. Amnesty International has called the prison where the immigrants would have been sent in Libya a hellscape. Marco Rubio, who believes his route to the next Republican nomination for president depends on how much cruelty he can publicly exhibit, has said this.
Beyond that, and I say this unapologetically, we are actively searching for other countries to take people from third countries. So we are active, not just El Salvador, we are working with other countries to say, we want to send you some of the most despicable human beings to your countries. Will you do that as a favor to us? And the further away from America, the better, so they can't come back across the border. I'm not apologetic about it. We are doing that.
No, we get it. You're not apologetic about it. You're trying to play cruel on TV because you believe that's how you will win the Republican nomination. Donald Trump told the reporter who asked about sending immigrants to Libya today that reporter should ask Homeland Security, and that was it. That was the end of it. Donald Trump didn't have the energy to do a version of his lies about who these people are. Donald Trump didn't bother with the angry retort about all the crimes Donald Trump imagines these people have committed without any evidence or any proof that most of them have ever committed a crime in their lives. Donald Trump didn't have the energy for his own act today in his 26th day in a row of being a total loser in the trade war that he started. Donald Trump is now choosing to say, I don't know, when he's asked about toys or anything involving children and his tariffs. Donald Trump, who earned the nickname Donnie Two Dolls on this program last week when he said American children should get used to having just 2 dolls under the Christmas tree instead of 30, those are his numbers, which was yet another proof of Donald Trump's utter obliviousness to how life is lived in the country where he is president, especially the way life is lived by children. Even Donald Trump could understand how bad the public reaction was to his 2 dolls idiocy. And so in his next attempt with that sort of question, all he did was raise the number of dolls to 3 or 4 or 5. Those are the numbers he said were possible. And while he was at it, he threw in pencils. No one asked him about pencils, but he said kids should get used to having only 5 pencils instead of, and again, this is a Trump number, 250 pencils, which again demonstrates Donald Trump's utter obliviousness to the life of the American child. On Meet the Press, Donald Trump was outraged at being asked about the rising price of strollers.
Tires, strollers, some clothing in the wake of your tariffs.
Excuse me, that's peanuts compared to energy. Energy is 60% of the cost.
But sir, you campaigned,
energy is the big.
You campaigned on a promise to bring prices down on day
Well, I don't know. When
one.
you say strollers are going up, what kind of a thing?
And then he changed the subject. Strollers, what kind of a thing? Question mark. Then he changes the subject. It really sounded like he doesn't know what a stroller is. That's what he meant by what kind of a thing, which is entirely possible. Because even before Donald Trump entered this period of what appears to be possible neurological decline, he lived the kind of rich, ultra self-centered, oblivious life that could make him not know what the word stroller means. That's possible. And later, on that day, on Sunday, on Air Force One, it sure sounded like the word stroller really isn't in Donald Trump's vocabulary.
Inflation's down, all costs are down, everything is down, other than, as Tristan said, the thing that you carry the babies around in, but that's up 3%.
The thing that you carry the babies around in. That's what he just said. It's going up a lot more than 3%, by the way, the thing that you carry the babies around in. Donald Trump wants you to pay more than double for a stroller, 150% more, 145% if it's imported from China. So if you're pregnant right now, tonight, you might not be able to afford a stroller when you really need one. And even if you can't afford one, no matter what the price turns out to be, you might not be able to get one in this country thanks to Donald Trump. The Washington Post reports virtually every car seat, stroller, bassinet, and changing table sold in the U.S. is made in China, making the children's products industry among the most vulnerable to fast rising costs and shortages. But with new tariffs more than doubling the cost of Chinese imports, prices on baby necessities are rising fast, and manufacturers and retailers are suddenly slamming on the brakes, halting months' worth of shipments that economists warn will lead to shortages of strollers, cribs, and other necessities as early as this month. If you're pregnant and your due date is in June or later, Donald Trump is going to make your life more difficult. Infant furniture sold in the U.S. now faces average tariffs of about 129%, according to an analysis by S&P Global Market Intelligence. Other highly taxed items include toys, 113%, and infant clothing, 41%, S&P found. Delta Children, the country's largest crib and children's furniture brand, paused nearly all shipments from China early last month. We're going to end up with bare shelves in another couple of months if things don't change, said Joseph Shami, the president of Delta Children. Bare shelves. So, no car seat for your infant born this summer. We're not talking any longer about the most expensive car seat in history. Yes, that's going to happen. It'll be the most expensive car seat in history. What we're talking about now is running out of them in this country because of Donald Trump's tariffs and no other reason. If Donald Trump had the slightest interest in the needs of the pregnant mothers of America tonight, the new mothers or the mothers of 3-year-olds who are growing out of their car seat into the next size car seat, Donald Trump could reassure all of them. He could reassure all of us and say everything for babies and children is exempt from the Trump tariffs. But you know what he said to those mothers and those fathers? You know what he actually said about this? Donald Trump, once again, said, I don't know.
The Treasury Secretary just told lawmakers that a tariff exemption for certain baby items like car seats is under consideration. Will you exempt some products that families rely on?
I don't know. I'll think about it. I don't know. I really don't.
That is a beaten man. I don't know. He's giving up. I don't know. He's giving up his performative act of having an answer for everything. Now he's just the I don't know president. And these are very simple questions. It's impossible to ask a president simpler questions than these. Donald Trump's answers are, I don't know. Donald Trump's Treasury Secretary, Scott Bessent, is now on record as having said the most inane things ever said by a Secretary of the Treasury, beginning with our first Secretary of the Treasury, Alexander Hamilton, who completely disagrees with Donald Trump on tariffs. Scott Bessent said something on television last night about explaining tariffs to a girl who might be required to have only 2 dolls this Christmas thanks to Donald Trump's tariffs. Scott Bessent's answer is one of those parody answers about how to talk to children. It is absurd from start to finish, but as you listen to it, it's worth noting that Scott Bessent and his husband are the fathers of 2 young children, both of whom were in the front row of his confirmation hearing. So this is an experienced father talking here. Here's how Scott Bessent tried to repair the damage his boss, Donnie 2 Dolls, has done.
This reporter behind me was quite snarky the other day when President Trump talked about the girl having 2 dolls. And he said, well, what? President didn't take the question, but he said, what would you tell that girl? And I said, I would tell that young girl that you will have a better life than your parents, that you and your family, thanks to President Trump, can now be confident again that you will have a better life than your parents, which working class Americans had abandoned that idea. Your family will own a home. You will be able to advance. You will have a good education. You will have economic freedom. That's what we are advancing.
Okay, Scott, your family will own a home. Great. But what about the little girls who think the dolls are coming from Santa Claus? How would you talk to them? How would you explain the tariffs to them? We know how this is going to end. Donald Trump is going to surrender in his trade war and declare victory. Donald Trump is claiming that at the White House tomorrow, they will announce, quote, a major trade deal with representatives of a big and highly respected country. So on day 27, when Donald Trump is supposed to have completed 27 trade deals, he's now claiming he will have completed one, and that will not even be true. Whatever is announced in the Oval Office tomorrow will not be a trade deal. An actual trade deal like NAFTA or the World Trade Agreement or any of the trade deals this country has entered into, including, by the way, Donald Trump's administration's rewrite of NAFTA in Donald Trump's first presidency, are all extremely detailed and lengthy documents in which everything is specified, and all of it has to be voted on and approved by Congress. That is what a trade deal is. And that is not what's going to be announced tomorrow. Donald Trump is losing the trade war. Every country in the world knows Donald Trump is losing the trade war. Every country in the world knows that Donald Trump's tariffs are being challenged in American courts right now. And every country in the world knows they do not have to negotiate a full trade deal with Donald Trump to get Donald Trump to surrender, because virtually all of Donald Trump's tariffs could be on their way to being thrown out by federal courts. Donald Trump has lost every day of his trade war, and he will lose again tomorrow. But he will surely get the more simple-minded sections of the news media to fall for whatever stunt he announces tomorrow. But if anyone asks him what's actually in the so-called deal that he's going to announce tomorrow, don't be surprised if his answer amounts to some variation on, I don't know. Coming up, what we might hear in the Trump announcement tomorrow and why federal courts might find the Trump tariffs are unconstitutional and throw them out. That's next. The breaking news of the hour is that the New York Times is reporting that Donald Trump will announce a so-called trade deal with the United Kingdom. The Times reports President Trump is expected to announce on Thursday that the United States will strike a trade agreement with Britain, according to three people familiar with the plans. A spokesperson for the White House declined to comment beyond Mr. Trump's post. A spokesman for the British Embassy in Washington did not respond to a request for comment. Here is the Secretary of the Treasury last night trying to explain the art of no deals.
President Trump has also said, if it turns out we don't have a deal, that's okay. He's fine with no deal.
In game theory, it's called strategic uncertainty, what you're talking about. Nobody does it better than President Trump.
Joining us now is Robert Hollyman. He served as the Deputy United States Trade Representative in the Obama administration, also served in the staff of the United States Senate with experience in the real world of international trade. Thank you very much for joining us tonight. You know how long it takes to negotiate a real trade deal, how complex that is, how much interaction each country actually requires with their parliament or Congress, because they all have to approve them. What are you actually expecting, assuming there's something to announce between the United Kingdom and the United States tomorrow? What are you expecting that might look like or sound like?
So big deals in trade take time because they involve important trade-offs. What we're likely to see tomorrow, if the press accounts are correct, is sort of the framework of what a potential agreement might be between the U.S. and the U.K. The details won't be fleshed out. It won't be legally binding. It'll be a basis on which to have further discussions. But it won't be a deal. It won't be a trade agreement in any conventional sense.
And it could also just politically, from Donald Trump's perspective, be the thing that allows him to step away from the trade war with that particular country.
Yeah, countries want to be able to give the president, give the United States something that the U.S. can claim is a victory, but the devil's really in the details. And what we've seen in past trade agreements is that they involve a lot of give and take. The ones that are the most meaningful to the U.S. are the ones that are the most difficult for our trading partner to do. That requires them to consult domestically, requires them to get parliamentary or legislative approval, requires them to make tough decisions. I've never seen a case where a country is prepared to make a tough domestic decision on a short time basis. What we're likely to see is a good framework, an interesting framework, but it's going to be far from a binding, durable trade agreement.
Yeah, it'll be a piece of paper, and maybe then Donald Trump will drop the tariffs with the UK. To the issue that's kind of unique in this situation, these tariffs are being very strongly challenged in federal court. Donald Trump is claiming that everything is a national security issue, that importing baby strollers is a national security issue. And there are lawsuits going after the underlying rationales and the legal justification Donald Trump has invoked in these various tariff announcements that he's made. And there's a strategy here that countries could employ, which is just wait for the federal courts to knock out these tariffs.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the president is using a statute that was passed in 1977 to deal with restricting a president's power to act in the case of an economic emergency. Importantly, the statute that he's relying on, the International Economic Emergencies Act, does not mention the word tariffs. And it's never been used to deal with tariffs. And under the Constitution, as you know well, Lawrence, tariff authority resides with the Congress. So the courts will be looking at this issue, and certainly countries that are negotiating with the United States are very aware of the fact that these courts might decide that the president has exceeded his authority. I think they will decide that. And many of these tariffs, not all, but many of them could fall as a result.
Yeah, it's such a limited authority for the president to use that I have to confess, I can confess to you as a former Senate staffer, that when I was the chief of staff of the Senate Finance Committee, I actually didn't know this provision existed because it was never used. And so we were legislating changes in tariffs in NAFTA and in the World Trade Agreement, and we were doing it, what I guess we could now call the old-fashioned way, in other words, the constitutional way. And you and I have both lived with the actual complexity of what that looks like and the time it takes and how much consultation it takes. And so it is just so stunning to see these tariffs go into place on that legal basis that, as it seems to me, I agree with you, that it seems completely successfully challengeable in court.
Well, I work for the Senator Russell Long from Louisiana, who was the chairman of the Senate Finance Committee when this statute passed in 1977. I didn't work for him at that time, but he was a strong chairman. It was a strong committee. They never even considered the legislation that the president's now using, and they are the tariff and trade authority in the U.S. Senate. Same thing for the House Ways and Means. They didn't come out of those committees. So I think the legislative history, in addition to the absolute silence in the statute, really shows that what the president was trying to do is use an untested theory to get out there as fast as possible, to get countries to pay attention, but those countries in paying attention know that the underlying authority for most of his tariff taxes is highly questionable. They may be thrown out of the courts. And of course, that will affect what countries do and what they put on the table for the United States, because they don't know that the deals are going to be lasting and durable. And by the way, as you correctly note, they completely go around Congress. None of these agreements will be presented to Congress in any way, shape, or form. And so they're not durable even beyond the current administration.
Robert Holleyman, you know, there's nothing I appreciate more than someone who has been in the room with the real governing, especially on something as complex as international trade. Thank you very much for joining us tonight. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
And coming up, the dramatic decline in Donald Trump's power in the Republican Senate, with Republican Senate leadership now admitting that they don't have the votes to get an important Trump confirmation candidate through the Senate Judiciary Committee. And today, Donald Trump just publicly gave up. The losing Trump nominee, who has publicly embraced a Hitler worshiper, has exposed Donald Trump's new weakness among Republicans in the Senate. The decline of Donald Trump continues next. Today, we got a breathtaking demonstration of the new weakness of Donald Trump in the Republican-controlled United States Senate. Here's Donald Trump responding to this question. This is what you're about to see as a response to this question. Senator Tillis has come out against Ed Martin as U.S. Attorney. Do you have any response to that? And Donald Trump's response, which you're about to see, was stunning.
I know Eddie's very talented, but that's really up to the senators. If they feel that way, they have to vote the way they vote. They have to follow their heart, and they have to follow their mind.
It's up to the senators? They have to follow their hearts? Since when? When Thom Tillis was toying with voting against Pete Hegseth, the most incompetent and unprepared defense secretary in history, Donald Trump brought damnation down on Senator Tillis, so that Senator Tillis finally, during the roll call vote on the Senate floor, decided to vote for the most incompetent and unqualified Secretary of Defense in history. Donald Trump does not have the power in the United States Senate tonight that he had in January or even February. And now, thanks to Donald Trump's weakness in the United States Senate, Republicans do not have the votes to confirm Donald Trump's choice for U.S. Attorney for Washington, D.C., and that is a very important turning point in Donald Trump's power in the United States Senate.
Our understanding is his nomination is not going to markup this week. Can you explain why that's happening?
Yeah, the process is pretty much the same for all nominees. I want president nominees to be successful, and that means we put on people that have the votes. That isn't the end of it, but that's where we are right now.
But do you plan to have a vote on Martin? Do you plan to have a vote?
I think I've said all I can say on this subject. You heard what I said.
Well, that's all he had to say. That's the chairman of the Judiciary Committee, the oldest member of the Senate, Republican Chuck Grassley, saying we do not have the votes to confirm Donald Trump's choice, Ed Martin, to be the U.S. Attorney for Washington, D.C. We have shown you the video of Ed Martin praising Timothy Hale, who himself has praised Adolf Hitler and was sentenced to prison for his participation in the January 6th attack on the Capitol. Here is that condemning video of Donald Trump's choice to be U.S. Attorney for Washington, D.C., Ed Martin.
One guy is named Timothy Hale. Tim served 3+ years in prison based almost entirely on the 1512 fraudulent charge. In prison, he did the things that he'd done in his life before, which is he'd thought a lot and read a lot and been a writer and a thinker. He's the nephew of our own Cynthia Hughes, who's done so much for so many of us. But he's an extraordinary man, extraordinary leader now of those who have survived January 6th. And I think he's resisted this, but I don't care because I have I bought this microphone, and I want him to come up and say at least a few minutes of thoughts, and have you encourage him with a round of applause. Timothy Hale. Tim?
And here's Senator Thom Tillis explaining his opposition to the nomination.
I have no tolerance for anybody who entered the building on January the 6th, and that's probably where most of the friction was. At this point, I've indicated to the White House I wouldn't support his nomination.
For Thom Tillis to say that publicly, won't support his nomination, and for Donald Trump to just meekly accept it, as he has, means that the Trump White House has given up, no longer trying to get the votes for Ed Martin's nomination. It takes 4 Republican votes on the Senate floor to defeat a nomination, but only 1 Republican vote against the nominee in the committee would end the nomination right there at the committee stage. The Republican Senate Majority Leader John Thune said this about Thom Tillis opposing the nomination. Quote, "I think that would suggest that he's not probably going to get out of the committee." Correct. John Thune is a very careful speaker who would only say that if he himself has given up on that nomination. And he said that publicly before Donald Trump gave up on the nomination, publicly. Thom Tillis is facing re-election next year in North Carolina, where he won his last election by 1.8% of the vote, with Donald Trump suffering now from the worst 100-day approval polls in the history of presidential polling, and with Donald Trump telling Thom Tillis's constituents in North Carolina that they will have to settle for less this Christmas, and their children will have to settle for much less this Christmas, and they might not be able to buy strollers or car seats. Senator Tillis apparently sees enough weakness in Donald Trump tonight to be willing to publicly oppose a Trump nomination. And not just oppose the nomination, but deliver the decisive vote that will defeat that nomination in the committee. And Donald Trump is now publicly and meekly accepting that defeat of that nomination, suddenly adopting the principle that it's up to the senators. That is tonight's report on the declining political power of Donald Trump in the United States Senate. Coming up, a Republican's 6-month-long attempt to overturn an election in North Carolina has ended in failure. The Democrat who won that election, Allison Riggs, will join us next. A big win for Democrats today in an important election that took 6 months to resolve after what Democrats called an assault on reality by Republicans. A federal judge issued a final ruling Monday against Republican Jefferson Griffin's legal challenge to tens of thousands of ballots and ordered the North Carolina Board of Elections to certify Democrat Allison Riggs' 734-vote victory in the election for the North Carolina Supreme Court, where she was running for re-election. Democratic National Committee Chair Ken Martin said, "This is a righteous victory for democracy and a clear defeat for political gamesmanship. For 200 days, Republicans in North Carolina sought to overturn the will of the people, hijack a state Supreme Court seat, and systematically undermine basic faith in our elections. Jefferson Griffin's relentless assault on reality has come to an end, and Justice Allison Riggs will finally take her rightful place on the North Carolina Supreme Court." Joining us now is North Carolina State Supreme Court Justice Allison Riggs. Thank you very much for joining us tonight. What do you believe was at stake for North Carolina in the counting of these votes?
What was at stake for North Carolina was really what was at stake for Americans. It's this idea of, when we have elections, do candidates who lose respect the outcome of those elections, or do they engage in gamesmanship to try and change the rules after the election? Today, voters in North Carolina won again. It shouldn't have had to happen this way. 6 months and 2 days, millions of dollars spent, 68,000 voters who were afraid and scared and confused and just really put through the ringer, including military voters. That's what it took here to get my opponent to concede. And I think we need to be clear-eyed about the fact that we keep having these near misses on constitutional crises. This is happening more and more, and we cannot keep stress testing our democracy this way. So I have been standing hand in hand with Americans all across the country, certainly North Carolinians, fighting for this bigger cause, but we need to not forget about it. We need to not move on, because this is going to keep happening again and again until we elect people who are willing to put Constitution and country over party and personal political ambition.
This 200 days did get the national attention that it deserves, and it's so extraordinary that we've come to a point where an election for a judicial position in North Carolina becomes a national issue because of the way the Republicans went after what the courts decided were completely legitimately cast votes.
Yeah, I mean, 68,000 voters who followed every rule. I think, we worked hard to make sure that people knew about this fight. I worry that people in power, folks in DC were like, well, let's just see if we can build out our playbook for selectively overturning elections in this relatively low profile state Supreme Court race. And I have to remind people that we want government that inspires us. We don't want this to be the new normal, treating it like garden variety, rough and tumble politics. There are real people who are at the receiving end of this kind of insidious gamesmanship. And we need to remember that those people deserve to have a voice that is heard in the political process. Those people get to decide who wins an election. And I think I'm eager to continue the work that I've been doing to make sure that when we run elections in this state and in this country, that we are electing people, in my case, good judges with strong constitutional convictions who will be independent and uphold the law, regardless of whether they like the political outcomes. So we're fighting for something big. It was a win for voters today, but it would be a mistake to think this is over here and now.
North Carolina Supreme Court Justice Allison Riggs, thank you very much for joining us tonight.
Thank you.
Tonight's last word is next. Donnie Two Doll's previously favorite hometown newspaper ran this report with the headline, Mattel to hike prices on Barbie, Hot Wheels and other toys to offset Trump tariff costs. With the price of Barbies going up, here once again is the campaign interview that has suddenly become the most relevant campaign interview to the Trump trade war. NBC News correspondent Shaq Brewster, with the full support and encouragement of their father, interviewed two girls named Stella and Maeve at a Trump campaign event last September.
What do you want him to do? What do you want him to say today?
I want him to lower prices and lower the taxes and make Barbies cheaper.
Make Barbies cheaper?
Yeah.
Tell me more about that. Have they gotten expensive?
Yeah, and Polly Pockets. All my favorite toys are so expensive.
And that is tonight's last word.